You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple. Subscribe. We're almost at 5,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion, or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's jump into today's story. They say killing gets easier with practice. They're wrong. It gets hungrier. I learned this at 3 AM in a Warsaw alley, watching my 15th target bleed out on cobblestones older than America. Viktor Petrov, arms dealer, father of 2. As his eyes dimmed, he grabbed my wrist, with fingers slick with his own blood, and whispered, "You feel it now, don't you? The hunger. It's not yours, Kael. It never was." That was 8 years ago. Today, I've fed that hunger 247 times, and it still wants more. My name is Kael Rynor. I kill people for money, but that's not the whole truth anymore. The whole truth is that something inside me has been growing stronger with every death, and I'm starting to suspect I'm not the one in control. Tonight I sit in my Prague apartment at 2:17 AM, field stripping my Walther P99 for the 3rd time in an hour. My hands shake, not from nerves but from restraint. The hunger claws at my rib cage like a caged animal, whispering names and addresses of people I've never met. People who need to die. People whose deaths would taste so very sweet. The apartment is sparse, professional, a place to sleep between contracts, nothing more. No photographs, no personal items, nothing that could tie me to a past that feels increasingly like someone else's life. The only decoration is a mirror across from my desk, and lately I've started avoiding it. My reflection has been arriving a split second late, like it's copying me rather than reflecting me. I press the heels of my palms against my temples and try to remember when the whispers started. Was it after the corrupt judge in Budapest who thanked me as I opened his throat? Or earlier, with the crime boss in Naples who called me the key as I watched the light leave his eyes? The memories blur together now. 2 decades of blood, painting a picture I'm only beginning to see. But there are moments that stand out in perfect clarity. Moments when my targets spoke words that shouldn't have made sense but felt true in my bones. 3 years ago in Moscow, I strangled a politician who'd been selling state secrets. As his windpipe collapsed under my grip, he managed to rasp, "The vessel grows stronger. We are feeding it." At the time I thought it was oxygen deprivation causing delirium. Now I wonder if he was the sanest person in that room. Or the arms dealer in Berlin last year, who looked into my eyes as I put a bullet in his brain and said, "It's almost ready, isn't it? The thing wearing your face. Soon it won't need the mask anymore." Every target for the past 5 years has said something similar. Words about vessels and feeding, about things growing stronger, about masks and faces and the hunger that lives behind my eyes. I told myself it was coincidence, pattern seeking in random noise. But deep down, in the quiet moments between contracts, I knew something else was at play. Something that made my trigger finger itch and my mouth water at the thought of fresh blood. The encrypted message arrives exactly as the Prague astronomical clock strikes 3. Not a second before, not a second after. I know because I've been staring at my laptop screen for 20 minutes, waiting for something I couldn't name. The message is simple. Coordinates in Romania's Carpathian mountains. A name, Brother Thalen, and a payment offer that makes my breath catch. Not because it's large, though it is obscene, but because it's the exact amount I was thinking of an hour ago. The exact number that whispered itself into my head while I cleaned my gun for the 3rd time. Attached is a single photograph. An elderly monk, tending a garden, his face serene in the afternoon sunlight. The moment I see it, the hunger inside me surges like a tide, flooding my mouth with the taste of copper and anticipation. My trigger finger twitches involuntarily. I should walk away. Every instinct I've honed over 23 years screams danger. The timing is too perfect, the payment too precisely calculated, the photograph too carefully chosen to trigger whatever lives behind my ribcage. But the hunger is speaking now, not just whispering, and its voice is stronger than my will. I book the flight to Bucharest before I consciously decide to take the job. As I pack my gear, rifle, scope, ammunition, the tools of my trade, I catch myself humming. It's not a song I recognize, something low and rhythmic that seems to come from deep in my chest. In the mirror, my reflection hums along, but its mouth is moving in different shapes, forming different words. The flight to Romania passes in a haze of anticipation. I don't sleep, don't eat, just sit in my seat and feel the thing inside me, pressing against my ribs with every mile we travel east. Other passengers give me strange looks. Apparently I'm smiling, though I don't remember choosing to. The rental car journey from Bucharest into the Carpathian mountains takes 8 hours through increasingly desolate countryside. The roads narrow from highways to country lanes to dirt tracks that seem to exist more as suggestions than actual paths. The deeper I go, the wronger everything feels. The trees are too quiet. No birds, no insects, no rustling of leaves in the wind. The shadows fall at angles that don't match the sun's position. Even my footsteps, when I stop to check my map, sound muffled, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. By the second day of hiking through forests that seem to close behind me like a healing wound, I start noticing other things. The bark on the trees has patterns that almost look like writing, if you squint just right. The rocks are arranged in formations that seem too regular to be natural, but too ancient to be human. And everywhere, carved into stone and tree and earth itself, are symbols that make my eyes water. If I look at them too long, not because they're bright or painful, but because they seem to exist in more dimensions than my brain can process. On the third day, I reach the Abbey of Silent Vigil. It perches on a cliff face like a stone vulture, most of it crumbled to ruins. Walls have collapsed, roofs have caved in, and vines crawl through windows like grasping fingers. But the bell tower stands perfect and untouched, its bronze bells gleaming despite decades of abandonment. There's something wrong about how intact that tower is. The metal should be green with verdigris, the stone weathered and cracked. Instead, it looks freshly built, as if time refuses to touch it. When I examine it through my rifle scope, I can see that the bells are covered in engravings, the same symbols I've been seeing carved into the landscape. I set up my shooting position 800 yards out, concealed among a grove of birch trees whose bark peels like diseased skin. Through my scope, I watch the abbey for hours. No movement, no signs of life. The hunger in my chest grows restless, pacing like a caged wolf. Then, at sunset, he emerges. Brother Thalen looks exactly like what central casting would order for peaceful monk. Brown robes patched at the elbows, worn sandals, the kind of gentle movements that speak of a lifetime spent in contemplation. He's older than the photograph suggested, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and hands that shake slightly as he tends a small garden behind the abbey ruins. The garden itself is impossible. Everything around the abbey is dead or dying. The trees are leafless, the grass brown. Even the stones seem to be slowly crumbling. But Thalen's garden is lush and green, filled with vegetables and flowers that shouldn't be able to grow in this soil, in this climate, in this place where life seems to wither just by existing. I center the crosshairs on his skull. My finger finds the trigger with the familiarity of long practice. The hunger purrs in anticipation, pressing against my ribs so hard I can see them bulging outward beneath my shirt. But as I begin to squeeze, Thalen stops working. His hands, still buried in the soil, go perfectly still. Then, slowly, impossibly, he turns and looks directly at me, 800 yards away. Through military-grade camouflage, through a telescopic sight designed to be invisible. His eyes find mine with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, locking onto its target. He stands, brushes dirt from his robes, with movements that seem to take forever and no time at all, and cups his hands around his mouth. His voice carries across the impossible distance, with crystalline clarity as if he's standing right beside me. The vessel arrives at last. Heaven holds its breath in terror, and hell opens its throat to sing songs of joy. The prison weakens with every breath you draw, child of shadow. The words hit me like a physical blow. The hunger inside me doesn't just surge, it explodes, roaring with recognition and ecstasy. For a moment I can't tell where I end and it begins. My hands move without conscious direction, muscle memory taking over, where my mind has gone blank with shock. I fire. The bullet takes Thalen center mass, the impact spinning him around before he collapses among his impossible vegetables. A perfect kill shot, delivered with the precision of 23 years of practice. But as his body hits the ground, every bell in the tower begins to toll. The sound is wrong. Not the mechanical ringing of rope and bronze, but something organic, alive. Each toll feels like a heartbeat in my chest, synchronized with the pulse of whatever lives inside me. I scan the tower through my scope. No movement, no bell ringers, just empty windows and swaying ropes that move to a rhythm that has nothing to do with wind or physics. The tolling follows me as I retreat. Not just the sound, but the feeling of it, the way it resonates in my bones and makes my skull ache. 15 miles away, in my hotel room in Brasov, I can still hear it. The desk clerk gives me strange looks when I ask if he can hear the bells. Apparently, I'm the only one who can. In my dreams that night, the bells ring in harmony with screaming. I dream of standing in the Abbey's garden, watching Brother Thalen plant seeds that grow into faces, the faces of everyone I've ever killed. They bloom like flowers, mouths opening and closing in silent words I can't understand but feel in my bones. When I wake, there's blood under my fingernails that isn't mine. It's too dark, too thick, and it smells like copper and ozone and something else, something that makes my mouth water and my stomach clench with hunger. The second contract doesn't come through normal channels. Instead, I wake to find an encrypted message already open on my laptop, though I have no memory of receiving it. No routing information, no digital fingerprints, no trace of where it came from. It's simply there, like it materialized from the ether while I slept. Lorenzo Vincenti, Rome, antiquities dealer specializing in religious artifacts. The payment offer is exactly double what I received for Brother Thalen. Again, not a round number, but something specific, calculated, chosen. The hunger responds to Vincenti's name like a dog, hearing its master's whistle, and I find myself checking flight schedules before I've even finished reading the message. But this time, there are other details. Vincenti isn't just a target. He's a collector of items related to the Order of Silent Vigil. The name means nothing to me consciously, but something deeper recognizes it. The thing behind my ribs stirs at the mention, pressing against bone with what almost feels like anticipation. I'm on a plane to Rome within 6 hours. The flight passes in a haze of anticipation and growing wrongness. I can't sit still, can't focus, can't stop the humming that seems to come from deep in my chest. Other passengers avoid me, and I catch snatches of worried conversation about that man and something wrong with him. When I check my reflection in the tiny airplane bathroom mirror, I understand why. My pupils are dilated to pinpricks despite the dim lighting. There are dark veins visible, under my skin, spreading from my chest outward like ink in water. And when I smile, which I seem to be doing constantly without meaning to, my teeth look sharper than they should. Vincenti's mansion squats in Rome's old quarter like a stone toad, all baroque excess and religious ostentation, the kind of place that screams old money and older secrets. Getting inside is easier than it should be. The security systems seem to malfunction as I approach, cameras turning away, and motion sensors going dark as if they're avoiding looking at me. Inside, the mansion is a shrine to obsession. Every room overflows with religious artifacts from every faith imaginable. Iron crosses and blessed chains, Tibetan prayer wheels and Islamic calligraphy, Jewish mezuzahs and Hindu statues. But they're not displayed with reverence, they're arranged like weapons, in an armory, as if Vincenti has been collecting shields against something he fears. It's his private study that makes my skin crawl, and my hunger purr with satisfaction. Maps cover every wall, connected by red thread like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But these aren't random connections. They're precise, methodical, calculated. Pins mark locations across the globe, and I recognize some of them. Cities where I've worked, streets where I've killed, hotels where I've slept between contracts. My entire career is laid out in red threads and steel pins. 23 years of death mapped with obsessive precision. But more than that, there are pins marking places I've never been, connected to targets I don't recognize. Future contracts maybe, or past ones I've forgotten. The hunger makes it hard to think clearly sometimes. At the center of the web is a photograph of Brother Thalen's abbey, with red lines radiating outward to 6 other locations. 5 of them are crossed out in what looks suspiciously like dried blood. Only one remains unmarked, a pin stuck in what appears to be somewhere beneath the city of Brasov, Romania. I find Vincenti in his vault, 3 levels beneath the mansion. The room is filled with medieval chains and locks that look more like restraining devices than collector's pieces. When I appear in the doorway, he doesn't seem surprised. If anything, he looks relieved, like a man who's been waiting his entire life for this moment. 247, he says without turning around, his voice echoing strangely in the stone chamber. That's your count, isn't it? 247 keys turned in the lock. My blood turns to ice water. Nobody knows my exact count. I don't even keep records. The number just exists in my head, as precise and unchangeable as my own heartbeat. He turns, and I see that he's older than I expected, probably in his 80s, with the kind of frailty that comes from a lifetime of carrying unbearable knowledge. But his eyes are sharp, intelligent, and utterly terrified. My family has been counting for 8 generations, he continues, shuffling toward a lectern that holds an ancient ledger bound in what looks suspiciously like human skin. Every death you've delivered, every soul you've fed to the thing that wears your face. We've been waiting for you since before you were born. He opens the ledger with hands that shake like autumn leaves. The pages are filled with names, dates, locations, all written in different handwritings, different languages, different centuries. But I recognize the recent entries. Every target I've killed in the past 5 years is listed here, along with dozens of others I've never heard of. Every link you cut weakens the chain, Vincenti says, running his fingers lovingly over entries that date back centuries. The Order of Silent Vigil has maintained 7 seals for 800 years, but they were never meant to last forever. They needed a key, a weapon, something that could walk freely in the world and feed the hunger that would eventually break them. He looks up at me, and in his eyes I see not hatred but pity. You were bred for this, Kael, shaped by forces you can't comprehend, guided by hands you can't see. Every choice you've made, every target you've selected, every method you've used, all of it carefully orchestrated to create the perfect vessel for something that should never have existed. I draw my pistol, but the motion feels sluggish. Wrong. The hunger is too strong now, pressing against my ribs with such force that I can barely breathe. Black veins spread across my hands like living tattoos. You feel it stirring, don't you? Vincenti asks, and his voice seems to come from very far away. The thing inside you. It's been feeding on the lives you've taken, growing fat on death and terror. Soon it won't need you anymore. I try to speak, to ask questions, to demand answers, but my voice comes out as someone else's, deeper, older, tinged with harmonics that make the stone walls crack. Soon, my mouth says, with a voice that isn't mine. I shoot Vincenti twice in the chest, watch him crumple among his chains and locks like a broken marionette. But as he falls, every chain in the vault explodes simultaneously, links scattering like shrapnel. The lights die, plunging us into darkness thick enough to taste. And from the depths of the mansion, from passages I didn't know existed, comes the sound of massive doors creaking open. Ancient hinges that haven't moved in centuries, groaning under unimaginable weight. The air fills with the smell of ozone and copper, and something else, something that makes the hunger inside me roar with recognition and joy. In the darkness I hear footsteps. Not human footsteps, but something else. Something that moves wrong, as if it's walking in more directions than three-dimensional space should allow. The sound gets closer, echoing from walls that seem to have moved since the lights went out. I run. Through corridors that twist in impossible directions, past rooms that weren't there when I entered, upstairs that seem to go down and downstairs that seem to go up. Behind me, the footsteps follow, never getting closer but never falling behind. When I finally reach the street, Rome looks different. The same buildings, the same streets, but the shadows fall wrong, and the air tastes of metal and anticipation. People avoid me without seeming to realize they're doing it, stepping aside as if their subconscious recognizes something their conscious minds refuse to acknowledge. I make it back to my hotel, but the sound follows me. Not just in my ears, but in my bones, my blood, the marrow of my existence. The thing inside me responds to it like a tuning fork, resonating with frequencies that shouldn't exist in this reality. That night, I dream of standing in a vast cathedral made of human bones. The walls built from femurs and rib cages, the altar carved from skulls. At the center, something tall and pale waits for me, with arms outstretched. Its face is my face, but wrong, as if someone tried to sculpt my features from memory and got the proportions slightly off. "Welcome home," it says with my voice, and I wake screaming. My hotel room window has been shattered from the inside, glass scattered across the street 3 stories below. There are bloody handprints on the remaining shards, handprints that match my own, though I have no memory of touching the glass. The third contract arrives before I'm even fully conscious. My phone buzzes with a message that shouldn't be possible. The sender is listed as my own phone number. The timestamp shows it was sent 3 minutes before I woke up, and the message itself is written in my own handwriting. Coordinates in Morocco. A single word. Finish. And attached, a photograph of myself standing in a desert cave, though I've never been to Morocco in my life. The flight to Marrakesh passes in a haze of dissociation. I'm no longer sure what's real and what's not. The other passengers flicker in and out of existence, sometimes there, sometimes not. Sometimes replaced by people I've killed who sit quietly in their seats and stare at me with empty eyes. The stewardess who brings me coffee has Brother Thalen's face. The businessman across the aisle is Vincenti, his chest still bearing the holes my bullets made. They don't speak, don't move unless I'm not looking directly at them, but I can feel their attention like weights pressing down on my soul. The desert hermit, known as Aziz ibn Fadlan, lives in caves 30 miles south of Marrakesh, in a landscape so desolate it might as well be another planet. The journey requires a guide, but when I arrive at the meeting point, the old Berber man who was supposed to help me takes one look at my face and runs, leaving his camel and his payment behind. I make the journey alone, following GPS coordinates that seem to shift every time I check them, through sand dunes that rearrange themselves when I'm not watching. The sun beats down with malevolent intensity, but I don't feel hot. I don't feel much of anything except the hunger, which has grown so strong it's affecting my vision. Everything has a red tint now, like looking through tinted glass. The caves appear suddenly, as if they materialized from the sand itself. The entrance is carved with symbols that make my eyes water, not the same ones I saw at the Abbey, but related, like words in the same impossible language. As I approach, the hunger inside me goes wild, pressing against my ribs with such force that I double over in pain. The caves go deeper than they should, tunneling down into the earth at angles that don't make geological sense. The walls are covered in carved symbols and dried blood, patterns that seem to move when I'm not looking directly at them. The air smells of copper and madness and something else, something that makes my mouth water and my hands shake with anticipation. In the deepest chamber, I find him. Aziz ibn Thalen sits in meditation, legs crossed, arms covered in fresh cuts that spell out words in Arabic. But as I enter, I realize the cuts aren't random. They form a map, a detailed map of my face, scarred into his flesh with obsessive precision. When I step into the chamber, he opens his eyes and smiles. But his lips don't move when he speaks, and his voice comes from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off cave walls that suddenly seem impossibly vast. The vessel comes to break the final terrestrial seal, he says, though his mouth remains closed. Heaven weeps in terror. Hell sings hosannas of joy. The silence breaker stirs in its prison of flesh. He stands, and I see that the cuts on his arms extend across his entire body, a living map of suffering that depicts not just my face but scenes from my life. My first kill, my training, moments I don't remember but somehow recognize. For 30 years, I have carved your approach into my skin, he continues, still without moving his lips. The voice seems to come from the walls themselves now, or perhaps from inside my own skull. Every line, every shadow, every expression of doubt that would cross your features when you finally understood what you are. The hunger inside me responds to his words, unfurling like a flower made of teeth and shadow. I can feel it pressing against my ribcage, testing the strength of its cage, growing impatient with the flesh that contains it. You think you're a killer, Aziz says, stepping closer. His eyes are black pits that reflect my own face back at me, but distorted, wrong, as if I'm looking at myself through a funhouse mirror. But you're not. You're an incubator, a womb. The thing inside you has been feeding on death, growing stronger, waiting for the moment it no longer needs your flesh to contain it. I try to speak, to demand answers, to assert some measure of control over a situation that's spiraling beyond comprehension. But when I open my mouth, someone else's voice emerges, deeper, older, tinged with harmonics that make the cave walls crack and bleed. The time grows short, my mouth says without my permission. The final guardian waits. The last seal weakens with every breath drawn. I watch in horror as my hand reaches for the combat knife on my belt, moving with purpose I didn't choose. Aziz smiles wider, and I see that his teeth have been filed to points. Yes, he whispers, and now his lips do move, forming words that taste like blood and metal. Free me from this vigil. Let me join my brothers in the silence that comes after endings. I drive the knife up under his ribs and into his heart, the blade sliding between bones with the ease of long practice. But as he dies, he doesn't scream or beg or curse. Instead, he laughs, a sound like breaking glass and distant thunder. His blood flows into channels carved in the cave floor. Channels I hadn't noticed before, but that were obviously there all along. The blood forms shapes as it spreads. Not random patterns, but letters, words, a message written in arterial red that glows with its own light. The last seal breaks at midnight. The vessel is ready. The hunger becomes the hunter. As I read the words, they begin to pulse like a heartbeat, and I realize the blood isn't cooling. It's getting warmer, hotter. The cave fills with the smell of burning copper and ozone and something else, something that makes the thing inside me purr with satisfaction. Behind me, something laughs with my own voice. I turn, but there's nothing there except my shadow on the wall. But the shadow is wrong, moving independently, gesturing with hands I'm not raising, forming expressions my face isn't making. As I watch, it peels itself away from the wall and stands facing me, a perfect silhouette of darkness wearing my shape. "Hello, Kael," it says with my voice, but the words come from a throat made of shadow and hunger. "We need to talk." I run. Through the caves, across the desert, through airports and cities that blur together in a haze of panic and impossible occurrences. But no matter how far I travel, my shadow follows, always one step behind, always watching, always waiting. Mirrors become my enemy. Every reflection shows me talking to someone who isn't there, gesturing at empty air, laughing at jokes I haven't heard. My reflection moves a split second after I do, like it's copying me rather than reflecting me. Sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, it waves. The hunger grows stronger by the hour, no longer content to whisper suggestions. Now it demands to be fed. When a pickpocket tries to steal my wallet in Budapest, I break his neck without thinking, without choosing, without even really being aware of the action, until I hear the snap of vertebrae. The moment his spine breaks, the thing inside me purrs with satisfaction, and I taste copper pennies on my tongue. That's when I understand the horrible truth. I'm not in control anymore. Maybe I never was. The revelation should terrify me, but instead it brings a strange kind of peace. All those years of wondering why killing felt so natural, why death called to me like a siren song, why I could take a life as easily as drawing breath. It wasn't because I was a monster. It was because I was a puppet, and something else had been pulling the strings. But puppets don't feel guilt, do they? And I do feel guilt. Crushing, overwhelming guilt for every life I've taken, every family I've destroyed, every future I've cut short, which means some part of me, however small, is still human. The question is it enough? In Prague, I return to my apartment to find it exactly as I left it, but wrong in subtle ways. The furniture is arranged differently. The books are in a new order. My gun, which I left disassembled on the desk, has been cleaned and reassembled with a care I don't remember providing. A message waits, carved into the wooden surface of my desk with what looks like fingernails. The letters are filled with dried blood that I somehow know is mine, though I have no memory of cutting myself. Charles Bridge, midnight. Come alone, though you never truly were. I arrive at the bridge early, hoping to scout the area, to maintain some tactical advantage, but the figure is already there, waiting at the centre of the span, as if he's been standing there for centuries. In a way, perhaps he has. He looks like he stepped out of a Renaissance painting, tall, unnaturally pale, dressed in clothes that belong to another era entirely. But it is his eyes that make my skin crawl. Black holes in space where eyes should be, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. When he speaks, his voice echoes from directions that shouldn't exist, as if sound itself is obeying different rules in his presence. "Kael Rynor," he says, and the words seem to arrive before he speaks them. "Vessel of the devouring dark, womb of the endless hunger, first and last of the silent sworn. Your purpose nears completion." His name is Erindor Kas, and as he speaks, reality seems to bend around him like light around a black hole. The bridge, normally crowded even at midnight, is completely empty. The city sounds fade to nothing. Even the river below has stopped moving, its surface mirror still and black as obsidian. Every kill you've made, he continues, producing an ornate dagger from thin air. Every target you've eliminated, every drop of blood you've spilled, all of it was chosen not by clients but by something far older than human civilization. The dagger writhes with engravings that seem to spell out names, and as I watch I realize they're the names of everyone I've ever killed. But more than that, they're moving, shifting, adding new names even as I watch. Names of people I haven't met yet but somehow know I will kill. The Order of Silent Vigil, Erindor explains, has maintained 7 seals for 8 centuries, keeping in prison something that predates the distinction between good and evil, between creation and destruction, between existence and void. He places the dagger in my hands, and the moment I touch it, visions flood my mind with the force of a tsunami. I see myself as a child, playing alone while something watches from the shadows. I see my parents, who I thought died in a car accident, actually being killed by men in dark robes who whisper apologies as they work. I see myself being found by the foster family who would train me, shape me, mold me into the perfect weapon. I see my first kill at 19. Not the random mugging I remember, but a carefully orchestrated event. The man I thought was attacking me was actually running from something else, something that had been following him for weeks. My intervention wasn't heroic self-defense. It was murder, plain and simple, and every death since has fed the same ravenous presence that now writhes behind my ribs like a second heart. You were chosen before birth, Erindor continues, and his voice seems to come from inside my own skull now. Bred for this purpose, shaped by every death you've delivered. The thing inside you has grown strong enough to break free, but it needs one final feast. The blood of the last guardian will give it the strength to shed your flesh like a snake sheds skin. The dagger pulses in my grip, warm and alive and eager. Through it I can feel the silence breaker's hunger as if it were my own, and realize with growing horror that it always has been. Every craving for violence, every moment when killing felt more natural than breathing, every time I chose death over mercy, it was never my choice at all. 3 seals remain, Erindor says, and I realize he's been speaking continuously, his words weaving through my consciousness like smoke. The monk was the 5th, the collector was the 6th. One final guardian stands between the silence breaker and its freedom, a guardian who has waited in darkness for 60 years, sustained by the same forces that imprisoned what you carry. As he speaks, the city around us begins to fade, becoming translucent, insubstantial. Through the ghostly outlines of buildings and streets, I can see something else. Older architecture, rougher stone, the suggestion of caverns that extend deep into the earth. In the catacombs beneath Brasov lies the final seal, Erindor continues, and now I can see it clearly. A vast chamber carved from living rock, chains and symbols, and darkness older than civilization. The last guardian waits for you there. When their blood touches this blade, the silence breaker will be born into the world, and your part in this grand design will be complete. He begins to fade, becoming one with the shadows that seem to be swallowing Prague block by block. But his final words linger in the air like smoke, written in letters of fire across my vision. You were never the killer, Kael. You were always the killed. The journey to Romania passes in a nightmare of half-awareness and growing wrongness. I don't remember booking the flight, don't remember packing, don't remember making any of the choices that carry me from Prague to Bucharest to Brasov. But I must have, because here I am, standing at the entrance to what was once the Black Church, holding a dagger that throbs with accumulated death and staring at a door that shouldn't exist. The entrance is carved into the foundation of the ruined church, hidden behind stones that look like they haven't been moved in centuries, but shift aside at my approach like they're eager to grant me passage. The steps beyond descend into darkness, so complete it seems to have weight and substance. As I descend, the architecture changes around me, telling the story of civilizations built one atop another. Medieval masonry gives way to Roman foundations, then to something older. Walls covered in symbols that predate human language, carved by hands that might not have been entirely human. The deeper I go, the more the dagger in my hand throbs with anticipation. It's warm now, almost hot, and getting warmer with every step. The hunger inside me has gone beyond restless to ravenous, pressing against my ribs so hard I can see them bulging outward, beneath my shirt. Hours pass, or perhaps minutes, or perhaps days. Time moves strangely down here, flowing like honey, thick and golden and wrong. I pass through chambers filled with bones, arranged in careful patterns, corridors where the walls bleed if touched, rooms where the air itself seems to whisper secrets, in languages I almost understand. At the deepest level, I find her. The chamber is vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls covered in chains that extend into the darkness like metal vines. But at the center, chained to a stone altar that's stained black with centuries of blood, is a young woman who looks barely 20. But her eyes hold the weight of ages. "Hello, Kael," she says, and her voice is the sound of every person I've ever killed speaking in unison. "I'm Lydia. I've been waiting for you to come home." She's beautiful in the way that broken things are beautiful, all sharp edges and tragic grace. The chains that bind her are not merely metal, but something else, something that seems to exist in more dimensions than my eyes can process. They're covered in the same symbols I've seen throughout my journey, but these are moving, shifting, rewriting themselves even as I watch. "I volunteered to be the final seal," she explains, and despite the chains, despite the obvious suffering, her voice carries no bitterness. "When the others died, someone had to complete the binding. I've been here for 60 years, sustained by the same force that imprisoned what you carry." Behind her, the chamber opens into something that isn't darkness but absence, a void so complete it makes my eyes ache to perceive it. Not black, not shadow, but a fundamental negation of everything that exists. And from within that impossible space comes a sound like a heartbeat the size of a cathedral. I realize with growing horror that I've been hearing it my entire life. It's been matching my pulse, synchronizing my breathing, timing every step I've ever taken. Every moment of my existence has been choreographed to this rhythm, this cosmic percussion that beats in frequencies older than matter itself. "The vessel arrives," comes a voice from the void, and I feel my own mouth moving, my own vocal cords vibrating, but the words aren't mine. They emerge from my throat in harmonics that make the ancient stones crack and weep moisture that looks suspiciously like blood. The womb of darkness stands ready to give birth to eternity. Lydia nods sadly, and in her eyes I see not just acceptance but relief. "I've watched you grow through scrying pools of blood," she says, gesturing towards smaller chambers I hadn't noticed, where shallow basins filled with dark liquid reflect images of my past. "Watch the silence breaker feed on every life you took, growing stronger, more eager, more impatient with the flesh that contains it." I look into the nearest pool and see myself at age 12, breaking a classmate's arm during recess. But in the reflection, something else stands behind me, tall and pale, guiding my movements with invisible strings. Another pool shows my first professional kill. And again, the presence is there, feeding on the victim's terror and pain. Pool after pool, reflection after reflection, my entire life laid out in blood and shadow. And in every scene, I'm not alone. The thing that's been wearing my face has been there all along, growing stronger with every act of violence, every moment of cruelty, every choice I thought was mine. When you kill me, Lydia continues, and her voice carries the weight of prophecy, the final seal breaks. The silence breaker will shed your body like a butterfly, leaving its cocoon. You'll die, but what emerges will have the power to unmake creation itself, to reduce all of existence to the perfect silence that came before the first word was spoken. I raise the dagger, and it feels like lifting the weight of every life I've ever taken. The blade glows with accumulated death, 247 murders distilled into sharp steel and cruel purpose. But as I hold it aloft, ready to complete the work that began before my birth, Lydia speaks again. "But here's what they didn't tell you," she whispers, and for the first time since I've arrived, she smiles. It's a sad smile, full of compassion and terrible understanding. The silence breaker needs your death to be willing. It needs you to choose to die, to embrace the ending, to want the darkness more than the light. Otherwise, it remains trapped in flesh that rejects it. The realization hits me like a physical blow, and I stagger backward, the dagger wavering in my grip. All of this, every kill, every contract, every step that led me to this moment, was designed to make me want to die. To make me hate myself enough that I'd welcome oblivion. To feed me so much death and suffering that I'd hunger for my own ending. And God help me, it worked. Standing in this chamber, beneath the world, dagger in hand, I realize I do want to die. The weight of 247 lives crushes down on me like a physical presence. Every face I've extinguished haunts my peripheral vision. Every family I've destroyed whispers accusations in my ears. The thing writhing behind my ribs has made my own body into a prison of guilt and self-loathing. Death would be a release. Death would be peace. I look at Lydia, chained to her altar of sacrifice, and understand why she volunteered. After 60 years of holding back the end of the world, death would be mercy. We're both prisoners here, both victims of forces beyond our comprehension, both ready to embrace the silence. The dagger rises again, its blade singing with anticipation. Around us, the void pulses with hunger, and I can feel the silence breaker pressing against the boundaries of reality, eager to be born. Heaven whispers prayers I can't understand, pleading for mercy. Hell screams songs of triumph, celebrating the approaching end. But in that moment between intention and action, in the space between heartbeats, a memory surfaces. Viktor Petrov, bleeding in that Warsaw alley 8 years ago. His final words. The hunger. It's not yours, Kael. It never was. What if he was right? What if the hunger, the compulsion to kill, the growing darkness, what if none of it belonged to me? What if I was just another victim, infected by something that fed on death and grew stronger with every meal? What if I'd never actually chosen to become a killer at all? The thought stops me cold. The dagger wavers in my grip, its glow flickering like a candle in the wind. If I'm just another victim, another puppet dancing to strings I can't see, then my death isn't justice. It's just another murder committed by the thing that's been wearing my skin for 41 years. I look at Lydia with new eyes, really seeing her for the first time. Not a willing sacrifice or a necessary casualty, but a person. A human being who gave up her life to protect a world that would never know her name or understand her sacrifice. Another victim of the same force that turned me into a weapon. Two victims standing in a chamber built by the dead, holding back the end of everything. The silence breaker roars inside me, no longer purring, but screaming with rage. It pounds against my ribcage like a caged animal, trying to break free without my consent. Black veins spread across my skin, like ink in water, and I can feel my body temperature dropping, as something alien tries to seize control. "You have to choose," Lydia says urgently, strain showing in her voice as the chamber begins to shake around us. Ancient stones crack and fall, and the void behind her swirls with frustrated hunger. "It can't break free without your consent, but it's strong enough now to try. Fight it, Kael. For the first time in your life, make a choice that's actually yours." The chamber shudders as the thing inside me thrashes like a caged beast. The pools of blood boil and overflow, and in their reflection I see all the people I might have been. The child who loved animals, the teenager who wanted to be a teacher, the young man who dreamed of helping people instead of hurting them. All the futures that were stolen from me the moment something dark decided I would make a suitable host. But I also see something else in those bloody mirrors. Every person I've killed, standing together in a silent crowd. They're not angry, not accusatory. If anything, they look understanding, compassionate, as if they know I was as much a victim as they were. Brother Thalen steps forward from the crowd, his robe still stained with his own blood. "The chain is broken," he says, his voice somehow audible over the silence breaker's rage, "but not in the way they intended. Choose life, child. Choose the light." Lorenzo Vincenti joins him, chains still hanging from his wrists. "You were the key," he says, "but not the key they thought you were. You're the key that can lock the door again." Aziz ibn Fadlan appears beside them, his self-inflicted wounds healed, his eyes clear and peaceful. "The greatest magic," he says, "is the power to choose mercy over revenge, forgiveness over justice, hope over despair. Use that power now." All around them, hundreds of faces look at me, with expressions of forgiveness and hope. Not the faces of accusation I've imagined for so long, but the faces of people who understand that we were all casualties in a war we never chose to fight. "Choose," they whisper in unison. "Choose for all of us. Choose for yourself. Choose life." I close my eyes and feel the weight of the dagger in my hand. For 23 years, I've been a weapon in someone else's war. For 41 years, I've been a puppet dancing to strings I couldn't see. But in this moment, in this choice, I can finally be human. The silence breaker claws at my insides with ethereal talons, trying to rip its way out through flesh and poitrine. Blood pours from my nose, my ears, the corners of my eyes. The pain is indescribable, like being turned inside out while on fire. But I hold on. I choose to hold on. For the first time in my life, I choose not to kill. The dagger falls from nerveless fingers, clattering on ancient stone. The sound echoes like a funeral bell, and suddenly the chamber is filled with light. Not the harsh glare of electric bulbs, but something warm and golden and alive. The silence breaker gives one final, reality-shaking roar that cracks the very foundations of the chamber. Then, like air rushing out of a punctured balloon, it begins to diminish. The black veins under my skin fade. The pressure in my chest eases. The hunger that has driven me for decades simply disappears. For the first time in my adult life, I can breathe without tasting copper. I can think without hearing whispers. I can exist without the constant gnawing need to feed something that was never truly part of me. Lydia smiles, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispers, as her chains crumble to dust. "It's finally over." The void behind her collapses in on itself with a sound like the universe sighing, sealing shut with finality. The chamber around us begins to change, the oppressive darkness lifting, the bleeding walls becoming simple stone once more. As the supernatural weight lifts from the world, I feel something I haven't experienced in decades. Peace. Not the emptiness I mistook for peace during my years as an assassin, but true peace. The kind that comes from choosing mercy over violence, forgiveness over revenge, life over death. "What happens now?" I ask, my voice hoarse from screaming. Lydia stands, stretching muscles that haven't moved freely in 60 years. Now, she says, we have a choice. We can walk away from this place and pretend none of it happened, or we can stay and make sure it never happens again. I look at the ruined chamber, at the broken seals and shattered chains, at the place where something ancient and hungry once waited for freedom. Then I look at Lydia, at this woman who sacrificed everything to protect a world that would never thank her. I've spent my entire life destroying things, I say. Maybe it's time I learned how to protect them instead. She nods, understanding passing between us without words. Two survivors of a war that never should have been fought, choosing to stand guard against future darkness. Together we begin the long climb back to the surface, back to the light, back to a world where choices matter and redemption is possible. Behind us, the ancient chamber settles into eternal silence, not the hungry void the silence breaker craved, but the peaceful quiet of a story finally ended. As we emerge into daylight for the first time in what feels like years, I realize that my story is just beginning. For 41 years, I was Kael Rynor, the assassin heaven whispered about and hell screamed for. Now, for the first time, I get to discover who I really am, and for the first time in my life, I'm genuinely curious to find out. The sun rises over Brasov as we walk away from the ruins of the Black Church, two people who've seen the face of ultimate darkness and chosen to turn toward the light. The city awakens around us, full of ordinary people living ordinary lives, blissfully unaware of how close they came to losing everything. We have work to do. There will be other threats, other forces that mistake destruction for purpose, but we'll be ready for them. Not as weapons or victims, but as guardians, as protectors, as people who've seen what happens when darkness wins and chosen to make sure it never wins again. My name is Kael Rynor. I used to be an assassin. I used to be a weapon. I used to be a victim. Now I'm something I never thought possible. I'm free. And freedom, I'm discovering, is the most beautiful thing in the world.